Hello, everybody, and welcome in to another episode of Speaking Steagles, the premier Pennsylvania pro football podcast. I am Nick Vete, joined as always by Ricardo Martinez Paz. First episode that the two of us are back on Marist College campus, where we both met. That's how our friendship began. That's how our love for that's kind of how we found out about each other's love of Steelers and Eagles football. Obviously, began well before we got to school, but definitely something our mutual love of football we bonded over. So Ricardo, back on campus, first episode. How you feeling, dude?
Feeling good. I mean, it feels good to be back on campus. But yeah, no, I mean, again, like we've said every single week, just closer and closer to the regular season, man.
Yeah, now it's really right around the corner because we're done with preseason. Rosters get cut down tomorrow. And then, I mean, it's a week of preparation, and we're off to the races on this thing, full steam ahead. And speaking of roster predictions, that's obviously what we're going to get to as kind of the main portion of today's episode. We're getting that a little later. We got some notes that we got to cover from week 3 of preseason game. And I guess that's where we'll begin. That's where we'll jump right in. So if you want to kick things off, we'll start with the Eagles, who had their final preseason game this past weekend.
Yeah, I mean, it was a 48-10 thrashing. The Eagles got destroyed in that one. But, granted, the Eagles starters didn't play on either defense or offense, but I guess sort of like we put them on the Instagram. But, yeah, so the first takeaway really for me was how poorly the defense played. I mean, they were whiffing on tackles, and sort of relating to like how Nick Sirianni and is like not wanting to tackle, to the ground in practice and stuff like that. I wonder if that had a factor into it. But then again, it's also like second and third stringers. So maybe there's like some influence in both aspects. But yeah, I mean, sure, the starters for Miami played for like, I believe a lot of the first half. Tyreek Hill burned the second team defense. And that was pretty embarrassing. That was like on the first drive too. But overall, they allowed 291 passing yards, 201 rush yards, 48 points total, as I said. So really poor showing from Jonathan Gannon's units, really. And then I guess moving on to the second one, the Eagles are only going to keep 2 QBs. I know there might have been that question of whether or not maybe Minshew would get traded or that the Eagles
That's
would
what
keep third.
you're saying, that you think they're only going to keep 2 QBs
Yeah,
after
that's what
how
I think.
poorly
Yeah.
Reed Sinnett played. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was a horrific showing from Senate. I mean, 12 for 22, 54% completion percentage, 104 yards, literally just 4.7 yards per attempt. I mean, that's just horrible all around. Very indecisive with his passing and decision making. So that really, didn't help him at all. He's not making the roster. Maybe
So you're
practice
dead
squad,
set
but
on it, even though supposedly, I mean, I feel like Sirianni's kind of he's been the type of coach that's been, from what I've read, likes to keep 3 quarterbacks. But I mean, yeah, it was a really poor performance
no,
this
I
past week.
mean he's been bad like these 3 preseason games. I mean he's shown like glimpses that he can be like maybe a backup in the NFL, but this last game was kind of the icing on the cake. You're like, oh yeah, he's not. They're not going to carry a third QB on the roster. That's for sure. I don't think they will.
It's not really worth it even too. I mean, we're gonna get into it more
Yeah,
later, but yeah, I hear what you're saying there after seeing how he performed and obviously how poorly Carson Strong has looked
yeah,
throughout his time with the Eagles this summer.
yeah. I mean, Strong only threw 4 passes in 3 games, so I mean, what's he really worth? I mean, he's getting cut too. So
It's just like Chris Oladokin for the Steelers. Like the Steelers brought him in late round pick, and it's like, what's the point? He didn't get any preseason snaps. He didn't get any really didn't even get any team reps. I think he got like less than 10 team reps in all of training camp, and it was just a waste of a draft pick. But yeah, I'm with you there. I hear you.
yeah, and then the last takeaway I think kind of falls more on the coaches. If anything, it's lack of motivation and discipline. I mean, like I said before, the defense was missing tackles, whiffing on them, and it just like sometimes they're just so discombobulated on the defense more specifically, and on offense they just couldn't move the ball at all. Only produced 10 points. I mean, one of them came off a muff punt, which was, I mean, later on in the game, but still pretty poor overall. I mean, I read something on the Eagles, Bleeding Green Nation, and saying that like one of their top guys who writes for them, it's like it seemed like Nick Sirianni didn't want to be there, wanted nothing to do with it. So I was
Honestly, he
like,
probably didn't. He probably didn't, if we're being completely honest. The way that he's ran his training camp, and the way that he didn't play, basically didn't play a single starter,
Yeah.
and he played literally the least significant players he could play in this preseason game. And everything we know about him, not tackling to the ground, trying to
Yeah.
avoid soft tissue injuries. I actually totally buy into that. That there's definitely no way that he even wanted. If he could have said, "Hey, we forfeit this game," I think he totally would have been willing to do that. But obviously, that's not fair to their opponent, who, obviously, if they're trying to get guys ready or get guys in shape, you got to play it. It sucks, but I totally buy into that. That he probably did not even want to be out on the field.
Yeah, I mean, there was just no heart in it. Like the second, I mean, like a lot of these players are fighting for a roster spot. It just seemed like they weren't fighting for it. Like, I don't know. I feel like that just comes down to coaching, and that's usually where players look to the head coach for motivation and all that stuff pregame to get them ready for the game, stuff like that. So I feel like that falls more on Sirianni than anything. But I hope that doesn't carry over to the regular
Yeah,
season.
I
I
mean,
don't think it will.
I don't think it's going to carry over to the regular season. The one thing that would concern me is like if he's really like pregame, like not into it at all. The game planning wasn't there, which I mean, you're not doing a ton of game planning for a preseason game anyway. But if there's
Yeah,
just like a lack of really like motivation from the coach himself, and you're one of those guys down on the roster fighting for one of those last spots, I mean, it would make me feel like shit that that's what my coach is thinking of. Like this is like one of the last times he's going to be able to evaluate me, and he's not even validating it as a real game. I don't know. That'd be a little upsetting to me, but I guess
yeah.
as long as it doesn't affect the starters in the first team, you're fine.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's his way of thinking of it, but I mean, it is what it is. It's a bad game. Move on. Regular season starts soon, but
And I mean, hey, at least we can say now the preseason's over, and they made it to the start of the season pretty much without any major injuries to speak of.
yes, exactly. I mean, there was like one or two that were for more depth players, but yeah, overall, definitely in good
Yeah.
shape.
Guys were banged up here or there, but really nothing major that's gonna hinder the team. Whereas I don't know if you have anything else that you want to add on the Steelers, add on the Eagles. Well, that's a perfect transition to the Steelers because Mike Tomlin did just about the opposite. And he's done the opposite pretty much all summer in the fact that he sent his guys out there. He's had hard tackling drills, practices before and after games. He's had them in pads, which really he hasn't done a lot in the past. And even in this final preseason game, he had the majority of their starters playing 2 full quarters, the first half of the game, which I mean, it's the complete opposite of Nick Sirianni that
Yeah.
we've seen, and it
Hmm.
almost cost the Steelers. They got lucky. Both Deontay Johnson and T.J. Watt were injured in this game. Neither one of them seems to be long term, and they both should be fine for Week 1. Unfortunately, DeMonte Casey got hurt. It looks like it's going to be a pretty serious injury that keeps him out for a large majority of the season. It doesn't sound like it's going to be the full season still.
Yeah.
So that was the really one unfortunate takeaway from this game was the fact that he went down injured. Supposedly the Steelers and what they were trying to do on defense this year, they were really going to incorporate 3 safeties a lot and kind of move Terrell Edmonds down into the box more as kind of a more of like a linebacker hybrid role. They're not going
Hmm.
to really be able to do that anymore, which is fine. They haven't done that in the past. They'll be able to survive. Edmonds and Fitzpatrick know how to play without it, but it definitely is a little bit of a blow to see KZ get hurt like that. But then again, that's also a guy who is on the second team. So he was going to be in the game one way or another. It's just unfortunate that injury had to happen. And the Steelers, frankly, in my opinion, I don't know if you feel the same way, are lucky that they didn't have to deal with any other major significant injuries to any of their starters.
I mean, yeah. I mean, imagine if T.J. Watt or Deontay Johnson's injuries had been long term. I mean, that would have been. I mean, I don't like. See, I mean, if you're thinking about it from Sirianni's standpoint, that's what like he's trying to avoid, and it's just like,
Yeah.
I mean,
But
obviously with the
on the
Steelers, would
flip
be like,
side, the Steelers may be more prepared to go out
yeah,
and win a game week 1 if it's a physical, hard fought battle,
yeah,
which,
yeah,
this was something I talked about. Chris Boswell, 4 or 5 on field goals. The one was a blocked punt or a blocked kick. But they're going to be in a lot of close games like that where they're going to be scrapping out wins, fighting for points, and kicking field goals and having one of the best field goal kickers in the league is going to be key. And Chris Boswell, hopefully that'll translate right, no problem, into week 1. I don't see any reason why it
yeah.
won't. But winning those tough physical games is going to be big. And I think to get the starters ready, week 1, here we go. I think that's big. And I think Mike Tomlin saw that. I think he saw that's what we have to do. Our quarterback situation. Well, I actually feel pretty good about it, given everything we've seen in the preseason. I think that's what he was kind of doing all throughout the summer and preseason was getting guys seriously ready for game action come week 1 because it's going to be a physical battle week in and week out.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how the two philosophies play out as we've been talking about for the last couple episodes. Really, how if the Eagles might be a little more rusty and like the Steelers might be a bit more sharper than the Eagles per
Mhm.
se, but Yeah, no, I mean it's almost time though to see that play
Absolutely.
out.
We are gonna keep an eye on that week one. And I mean, it's interesting because, like I said, Tomlin had that physical mantra, the opposite of Sirianni, all summer. And really, the only injuries, major injuries, to speak of, were two guys who were further down on the depth chart. Casey was probably the biggest one that hurt the most. But
Yeah,
outside of that, Carl Joseph, Anthony Miller, they were both, season-ending injuries, but they were fighting for a roster spot anyway. And then, I mean,
yeah,
you had a couple other guys, Miles Killebrew, Marcus Allen, all guys we're going to get into, Montrevious Adams, guys that have been out with injuries for a while, but all indications make it seem like it's not that extensive. And we'll obviously get into that in, just a few minutes here when we get into our roster breakdowns, how that's going to fit. But overall, the Steelers had a very physical training camp, a very physical preseason, and they made it out all right.
yeah. It's good for both teams that they made it out. It's again interesting how both philosophies like are different, are very different. Yet it seems like they're both in pretty good shape heading into week one.
Yeah. A few other notes that I had. I mean, I thought the defense looked really good when the starters were in there. Obviously, they were going up against Tim Boyle, so it's not like there was too much that they really had to worry about. But yeah, I honestly do think this defense is primed to kind of return to their form 2 years ago when they were like the best defense in the league. Last year, obviously, their run defense really hindered them. But if Alulu is healthy, Ogunjobi's healthy, I think we're going to see this team really thrive on the defensive side of the ball. Um, Outside of that, I mean, the offensive line again didn't look good. They only allowed 2 sacks, which was less than last week. But still, the penalties are an issue. They killed drives. We saw it happen. There was 2 drives, I believe, where they committed penalties. It completely stalled a drive that was going well, and they had to settle for field goals. But I mean, Dan Moore had 2 penalties. Kevin Dotson had a penalties. Okorafor had a penalty, and Kendrick Green also had a penalty. So I mean, you're talking about 5 penalties on the offensive line just alone. That's not going to cut it in a game, and that you're really going to put your offense in some tough spots if that continues. And I mean, I don't want to harp on the offensive line too much because it's going to be something I talk about going forward in the regular season. I mean, it is.
Yeah,
It
it
is,
is.
unless they
Yeah,
make a move and try to add something. I mean, I actually read even Andre Dillard. Like someone was talking about, could he be a potential target for the Steelers? I don't know if the teams would trade together. I think it's more unlikely this year than last year because they play each other. I think in week 7, sometime
yeah,
early in the first half of the season, they play each other. But that would be a guy that to keep your eye on. I mean, he would slot in as a starter, I think, over Dan Moore right away. Um, but yeah, the offensive line is it's rough, man. It is really rough. I'll talk about it more. I mean, you know what I'm talking about, man.
Oh yeah.
It,
It's
it, it,
it's
it's without a doubt. This was a takeaway I had from week 1 preseason game was how bad this offensive line is
yep.
going to be, and that's really going to be what hinders this team from being good more so than the quarterback. But I mean, like they may be the worst offensive line in football right now. I don't think that could be an exaggeration. I mean, you'd
Yeah,
have to really go and dissect it and look team to team, but they are definitely on the bottom half of offensive lines around the NFL.
yeah. That's not good, but
Um, Real quick as we get ready to go into our roster predictions. Also, just an update on the quarterbacks. I think Trubisky is the clear-cut starter. Tomlin still hasn't named one as a starter, but he's gotten the majority of the first team reps. Played really his best preseason game this week. 15 for 19, 160 yards. To close out the first half, he had a 2-minute drive, a drive within the final 2 minutes that scored it for a touchdown, and he had a 119.3 passer rating. So I think he really locked up that starting job to start the season. The big thing for me is going to be Kenny Pickett being the backup, and I think that we saw that that's the direction they're going. They only gave Mason Rudolph one drive, and he went 0 for 3 on that one drive. So I'll get into that in a second, but I think Trubisky's the starter come week 1.
yeah. I mean that makes sense. Sort of what we've been saying all along. So I mean that's not wouldn't be surprising if Tomlin names him as the actual starter.
I'd be surprised if it was anything different. I also want to
Yeah,
touch on Jannard Avery, but I'm going to save that for our roster prediction so that we can get right into that now. When I get to the
yeah.
outside linebackers, I'll talk about him. The Steelers
Mhm.
putting him in their final round of cuts. Well, their last round of cuts prior to this final round of cuts that's taking place now. But that being said, let's get right into our 53-man roster predictions. I know we were both really excited about this, and we're going to go position by position and give you who we think is making the roster, the final 53 for each position. So, Ricardo, why don't you start us off here with the Eagles quarterback situation? I know you alluded to it a little bit already.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously Jalen Hurts is going to be the one starting. All the pressure on him, all eyes on him. So he's going to be starting, and Gardner Minshew is a backup. He's probably not getting traded anytime soon, unless some starter goes down, and maybe the Eagles want to accumulate some picks or something like that. But
Yeah.
either way, Gardner Minshew is there as a backup. hopefully don't see much of him or him at all really this season. But
Yeah, and I mean,
if only it
I
goes
think
through.
for the Eagles, yeah, there's no way that you can really deal him and then go with Reed Sinet as your backup right now,
Yeah,
unless someone were to become available in a backup option. I also think just on the open market, guys like Mason Rudolph or Jimmy Garoppolo would probably be, more coveted early on.
yeah,
Considering Rudolph's on a cheap contract, if you wanted to go that route, or if you want someone who's really been a bona fide starter, it'd be Garoppolo.
absolutely. Yeah. So it's those two, the only two QBs on the roster, as I alluded to earlier. So
Now, do you think that they keep Strong or Sinet on the practice squad, or do you think that they look for someone else to become available who's maybe a little bit more of a promising developmental project that they could put on the practice squad in case they really needed someone to come up?
I feel like they might keep Sinet. Strong, I'm not so sure because, like I said, he didn't really play at all of preseason. So Sinet would most likely be on the practice squad over Strong, but I could see how they might look for other options and someone younger to develop. Perhaps that would be perfectly logical in my opinion.
Yeah, I was even thinking, I feel like the Colts are a team that have a lot of young quarterbacks who are kind of mid-level draft picks. Obviously, I think Ellinger is going to be the backup there,
Yeah,
but I mean, I know they brought in Jack Cohn. I'm not sure if that kid they drafted in the 4th round like 3 years ago is still there. I don't even remember his name. So that could be someone from there could potentially get cut, and the Eagles could, look to bring in kind of a guy like that who could be more of a little bit more of upside than what they have with Sinet and Minshew.
yeah,
So the quarterback thing for the Steelers is so interesting because I'm hot. Like Trubisky's going to be the starter. I'm all in on that. And I am all in on Kenny Pickett needing to be the backup come week 1. Don't have this guy in street clothes on the sideline, holding a clipboard, not doing much. This guy needs to be fully engaged, ready to come into a game at a moment's notice. Should an injury go down, I truly believe that you learn more as being the primary backup and not being a third string quarterback on a team. I think it's important for him to be dressed, ready to go on the sideline, in that mindset that it's game time whenever he's on the field, and he could have the potential to get put into the game. So that being said, it sounds like the Steelers aren't going to keep Rudolph, or they are going to keep Rudolph. Excuse me, they aren't planning on trading him before this deadline. I really hope they trade Rudolph because I don't know what value he has to the team if he's the third string quarterback not dressing. And like I said, I don't want him dressed to be the backup come week 1. So I'm still going to hold out that the Steelers are keeping this close to their chest and they're looking to make a move sometime here before week 1 to get him off the roster. So I'm going to say Rudolph is off the roster, and I'm also going to go with 2 quarterbacks for the. Well, it's interesting. You know what? I'll keep Rudolph on there for now because I don't know if a trade's coming in the next 24 hours here when the
yeah,
cuts come. But I do think that they are still going to trade him before the deadline. So I'll say 3 quarterbacks from that initial cut stay on the roster, and Rudolph, Pickett, and Trubisky. But I still think Rudolph is getting dealt before the regular season.
yeah. I think I would also hope that that happens because yeah, your points absolutely make sense on that.
Yeah. So do you want to go to running backs now?
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I feel like this is very clear cut. It's going to be the same 3 running backs that were on the roster last year. And Miles Sanders, obviously, still sort of dealing with a hamstring injury. Boston Scott as the backup, or Kenneth Gainwell. Really, I mean, those 2 and 3 running backs there. I mean, Gainwell's had a bit of an underwhelming training camp in preseason, but I feel like he could. I don't know how the carries will work necessarily, but I think it's going to be more running back by committee. Um, Especially with Sanders, and his injuries always
He
seeming to
hasn't
plague
he
him
hasn't played
somehow.
he hasn't played or practiced since the hamstring injury, has he?
No, he's not.
Yeah,
So
that's what I thought.
it's not
I mean,
very encouraging
no,
to
not
start.
encouraging, but I'm kind of with you. I kind of see that as being still a running back committee as they kind of held it last year. And I expect Gainwell to definitely get more touches this season.
Yeah, and then I would say Jason Huntley maybe could make the roster if depending on Miles Sanders' injury, but I I mean I think he'll be practice squad at the very least.
Yeah, yeah. I think the only way, and I mean, from what it sounds like, it doesn't sound like Sanders' injury, if he were to miss any time in the regular season, would be more than a week or 2. So
Yeah,
I don't know if it's
exactly.
enough that you'd want to put him on the short-term IR.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I hear. So you're going with 3 for now in this
Yes,
prediction.
yes.
Okay, sounds good. So for my running backs, obviously it's pretty clear cut at the top. It's Najee Harris, who actually revealed that he had a Lindsay fracture, I believe is how you pronounce it, in his foot that he was dealing with the training camp that they kept very hush hush, close to the chest. Mike Tomlin was actually surprised that he even told the media, but he's fully healthy, ready to go. So I guess it's kind of a non-story within the story is that, it's okay. We just didn't know. And good job by the Steelers organization to keep it quiet, because otherwise it would have been a much bigger deal than
Yes.
than obviously it is now. So I'm actually happy about that. But I think he's the clear number one. I think Benny Snell is without a doubt making the roster as the number two. Then it comes down to the number three. And I'm going with Jaylen Warren. I mean, I don't think it's much of a surprise to people either. The undrafted free agent rookie. Um, he's had more touches in each of the last two preseason games than Anthony McFarland. I was really hopeful that Anthony McFarland could have a good preseason, light it up this summer. He really hasn't. I thought that he could fit really well in Matt Canada's system, but I think it's just at the point where this guy's always been home run or bust, and we really haven't seen him hit any home runs in the NFL. So I think the Steelers are going to move on from him. If they can keep him on the practice squad, fine. If not, they'll probably keep Mateo Durant on the practice squad. But I see them going with three running backs. I think it's Najee, Snell, and Jaylen Warren to start the season. Those three guys.
Yeah, that seems to make sense. And I sort of thought McFarland would have had a better, or like would have made a better case for making the roster as a third running back, but it seems like that's not
he just hasn't showed enough to really warrant him being on an NFL roster at this point. It stinks. I was rooting for him. I thought he could really add a different dynamic to this offense and alleviate Najee Harris a bit, and you could get him the ball in creative ways, but we just haven't seen any sort of production from him, unfortunately.
Right. So should we move on to the wide receivers?
Let's do wide receivers, bro.
Two really good position groups.
This is interesting for the Eagles here. I'm curious how this shakes out here.
Oh,
First off, tell me how many guys you're keeping. How many guys are making the roster?
I'm keeping 5.
5. Okay, sounds good.
You'll see why.
Walk us through the obvious 4. Walk us through the obvious.
Okay, yes, the obvious 4: AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, Quez Watkins, Zach Pascal. The last one, I think it'll be Jalen Reagor. I mean, he's had a pretty his best preseason training camp. I mean, in his career so far, which is, I guess isn't really saying much considering he had a lot of bad drops in the last 2 training camps and preseasons. But I think the Eagles are going to keep him at least until week 1 or something around there. For the 53-man roster cuts, I think they're going to keep him and then put Deion Kane, the receivers Bryn Covey on the practice squad. And in the event that the Eagles get a trade offer that's appealing enough to them to trade Jalen Reagor, I think, they'll promote one of those from the practice squad, one of them from the practice squad. But I think they're going to keep Reagor. That's my feeling. But
I think it makes the most sense because Britton Covey really hasn't done anything catching the ball in preseason as an actual wide receiver. And it's not like he's really been leagues better than Jalen Reagor at returning punts. And like you said, you've seen one of the better training camps from Jalen Reagor. And unless they trade him, I'm kind of with you. I think that's the direction they're going to go. I like Deion Kane a lot. I'd love for him to make a roster. I talked about this last week, how I'm a fan of him. But it's just at the point, man, where it's like he's too one-dimensional. He doesn't really help you on special teams. He doesn't return punts. He's just right on the cusp of being that practice squad guy. But to me, I think he's still the first call-up that they have if someone goes down with an injury. Also, I wanted to ask you, what do you think happens with Devin Allen here? Because I know some people are making the case that if they move on from Reagor, that maybe Devin Allen's the guy that gets the final roster spot because of how well he played on the special teams as a gunner in this last preseason game.
I mean,
do you think there's any possibility of that?
I think so. I mean, again, that depends on whether or not Reagor gets traded. I don't think he will be in the next 24 hours, but if that's the case, okay, I could see that being a real possibility. But then, I don't know. I feel like they might want to have another receiver, a 6th one perhaps, because then, I don't know how much of a threat Devin Allen's going to be.
As a wide receiver.
Insane speed. Yeah, as a wide receiver, route running, not the best. Catching, inconsistent. So special teamer, it'll be great, I would think. But, having perhaps another receiver who's more short-handed wouldn't hurt to have 6 receivers necessarily. So, that could happen.
Yeah. I think the thing with Devin Allen, I'm totally with you that I think if they were to keep Devin Allen on the roster, they would sacrifice another guy at a different position because I don't know if you'd want him being your 5th wide receiver because then you're one injury away from him being needing to rotate in. So, I'm with you. They'd only do that if they kept him as a 6th wide receiver. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's a team out there that needs a gunner and is like, hey, this guy can do it. He's got speed. We'll keep him as a 6th wide receiver. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Steelers cut him if he gets picked up soon thereafter for another 53-man squad that's a little short at wide receiver and is willing to keep 6 guys.
Yeah, definitely.
As for the Steelers at their wide receiver position, I have them keeping 6 guys actually to start the season. I think it's pretty clear cut. Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, George Pickens, all 3 are making the roster. All 3 are starters. There's no question there. Gunnar Olszewski's looked good actually as a wide receiver, and he's obviously going to be your punt and kick returner. So he makes the roster as well. That's 4. And then you've got 2 spots there. Calvin Austin, the rookie, he hasn't practiced since I think he played in the preseason week 1. I can't remember if he did or not, but he hasn't practiced since before since any time recently after that he's been hurt. So I don't think that he's going to be on the roster to start the season. I think they're going to look to put him on short-term IR and bring him back later. So that opens up a spot. And then I also think that they are going to keep 2 more wide receivers. And I think that Miles Boykin is the interesting one because he's looked good. He's come on strong at the end of camp, but he's getting paid a significant amount of salary. But for the Steelers, my mindset is if he's the guy who's been the best for the job and he's played the best and he helps you a ton on special teams because he is a good gunner like we were just talking about before, like keep him on the roster. You've got the cap space. There's no reason to cut him if it comes down just to cap. So I think he makes the roster. And then I also think that Steve Sims makes the roster as well. He's come on strong in these last couple preseason games. And if it weren't for the fact that Calvin Austin is injured, I don't think Steve Sims makes the roster. But I think because I think that that's what the Steelers are going to do, I think they keep Steve Sims as that 6th wide receiver, and he gets a spot, at least to start the season until Calvin Austin gets healthy to potentially continue to prove himself.
That's a pretty good squad, I would say. Pretty good group of receivers. I mean, yeah, that's I don't know. It's pretty close. I mean, I feel like in terms of talent, both teams wide receivers.
Yeah, and I do think that this is probably where the Steelers are deepest on the offense is at the wide receiver position, and Tyler Vaughns has also had a good training camp and a good preseason. So I think he's going to stick around on the practice squad. The Steelers are going to keep him there. And if the Steelers don't keep Steve Sims, then I see them moving him, also trying to keep him on the practice squad and keeping him in the building. So that's how I see wide receiver shaking out.
All right. So tight ends time. All right. Let's see. I mean, this one's also fairly obvious as the number 1 tight end is going to be Dallas Goedert. And then I think the Eagles are going to keep 3 tight ends. They tend to run a lot of 3 tight end formations under Sirianni. So they're going to keep Jack Stoll, who's more of a blocking tight end. He's a pretty good blocker. Receiver-wise, not so great. And then at the 3rd one, I'd say Grant Calcaterra, who's better as a catching tight end as opposed to a blocking tight end. So it's a bit of, I mean, it kind of like sort of equalizes and like neutralizes itself, balances out in terms of the abilities of the last 2 tight ends. So I think the Eagles will keep those 3.
Yeah, I don't think that for the Eagles at tight end, there's really much of a question about what they're going to do there.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty clear cut. And honestly, I'll run through the Steelers real quick because I also think it's clear cut. 3 tight ends, Pat Fryermuth, obviously your number 1. Zach Gentry, kind of like Jack Stoll, primarily a blocking tight end, really hasn't ascended to the pass catching, more dual threat tight end that I was hoping for, but he'll stay there. And then I also think they're going to keep Connor Hayward. He's so versatile, and he's shown that he started playing on special teams a little bit. Obviously, tight end is where the Steelers have been working him out. If you need him to line up in the backfield as kind of like a fullback or some kind of special package, they could also do that with him. So I think because of his versatility, because he's had a good summer, I think the Steelers keep him around as that 3rd tight end, even though blocking is the one area of issue for him. And I don't think there's much question that of what the Steelers or Eagles are going to do at that position.
Yeah. So should we move on to offensive line then?
Yeah, let's do. So how do you want to do offensive line straight up, or should we do tackles and interior offensive linemen separated?
We
could just do one straight shot if you want.
Yeah, let's just do that. I mean, we could like sort of divide it up into tackle. Like we just say the position before their name, I guess.
Yeah, go ahead. Why don't you run us through your starters real quick?
Okay, yeah. So starters at left tackle, Jordan Mailata, that's obvious. Landon Dickerson as left guard. Jason Kelsey, assuming he's healthy, will start week 1, but he'll still be on the roster as a starting center. Isaac Seumalo, it's his job to lose as the right guard. And then Lane Johnson at right tackle, which really this isn't a surprise to anyone, this starting lineup. And then for backups, Andre Dillard as a backup tackle, or maybe he gets traded to the Steelers. Something like that could happen. I could absolutely see that. And then Cam Jurgens, obviously, is the backup center. Sua Opeta, Jack Anderson, Jack Driscoll are pretty versatile. I mean, Jack Anderson can play a bit of center, guard, tackle, wherever he's needed. I mean, they're good role players, good backups to have in case someone goes down. So those are my 10 players that I believe will be on the roster come week 1 or come
Yeah,
tomorrow.
I know I've talked to. So I mean, I don't think it's really all that. I think 10 guys, unless Dillard is traded, that's what they're going to go. And I don't think a trade's going to happen before cut day tomorrow. So let's say hypothetically though they were planning on cutting, or excuse me, trading Andre Dillard. Would you be comfortable just kind of keeping it as is with kind of your backup tackle situation just being Jack Driscoll, essentially? Maybe Jack Anderson only really plays on the interior. Or would you see them then at that point looking to keep someone like LaRaven Clark or Awasika? Would you see them keeping them in that situation?
Yeah, I was going to say LaRaven Clark would probably be the more likely call up from practice squad. So, I mean, they would probably, elevate him to the active roster if the Eagles were to trade Dillard away.
But you think one way or another they're keeping 10?
Yes, I do.
Okay, sounds good. All right,
Yeah.
makes sense. I'm with you there. I wouldn't be surprised by that. It wouldn't shock me if they just went into the season with Dillard there as the backup, because obviously, you want a swing tackle who, can hold his own if, God forbid, any long-term injury happened to Mailata or Johnson. So it wouldn't shock me if they kept him there, because then, moving on to a guy like either Jack Driscoll or LaRaven Clark, because I think it's pretty clear-cut Driscoll's better on the inside.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm with you there. I think that is pretty much how things are going to line up. As for the Steelers here, I have them keeping 9 offensive linemen, so one less than the Eagles. And basically the starters, pretty clear cut, even though it's rough. Dan Moore Jr. At left tackle, Kevin Dotson, I think, beat out Kendrick Green kind of easily, even though Kevin Dotson really hasn't done anything over the top spectacular for the left guard spot. Mason Cole, who's honestly looked like the best offensive lineman so far throughout the preseason. He'll be the center. James Daniels also at guard, and then your right tackle is going to be Chukwuma Okorafor. That's going to be your starting 5. And then behind them, I think it's a little bit of an interesting question. I think your swing tackle, without a doubt, is going to be Joe Haig. He's got experience. He's started before in this league. He can play both tackle positions, not much of a question. Then I think you also look on the interior. They're going to keep Kendrick Green, but Alex Kozora of Steeler Depot actually made a good point today. Kendrick Green is not going to start at guard. He can't play right guard. He can only play left guard. He's going to be your backup guard, and you've got guys who arguably are better than him in John LeGlue, and he's your third string center. So what does he really do for your football team? They're not going to cut him because he was a former 3rd round pick, but he's really unessential to what the Steelers are trying to do and trying to win this season because of how bad he's been. He's been by far the biggest disappointment to me. Maybe Dan Moore between those two on the offensive line so far. But I think he's going to stay as kind of that as a backup guard. They're also going to keep J.C. Hassenauer, who can play center or guard. And then I have the last guy being John LeGlue. I think he makes the roster because he can essentially play every single position on the offensive line. I don't know if he's gotten many snaps at center before, but he can play guard, he can play tackle. Very versatile. He started a few games for them last year. The only guy who I could potentially see making the roster over him would be Trent Scott, because he's actually got a history with our new offensive line coach. They've been together everywhere they've been, but I think they're going to try and keep him on the practice squad and elevate him if someone goes down at a tackle position. And I think they're going to value the versatility first and foremost and just leave Trent Scott. Value the versatility of LeGlue and leave Trent Scott off to start things. So that's how I see the 9 offensive linemen going.
So you don't think the Eagles would keep a 10th, given what you just said about Kendrick Green? You don't think they might keep a 10th player, perhaps?
No, I think they're keeping. I think they're keeping 9 because I mean, who's the guy that you have to get on the roster over some of these other guys I'm going to get to on defense? And it's the fact that Hassenauer and LeGlue both have the versatility to play right guard if you need them to.
Right. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Just to sort of sum up the offense, that was 23 players that I just listed out of the 53. So 30 remaining. Just a little.
Let me add up mine real quick. 6, 3 tight ends. Oh, also to mention, fullback Derek Watt is also making the roster in my projection. I know I didn't specify him with the running backs, but there seems to be no indication he's getting cut. He helps a lot on special teams. he's still got a role on this team, even though, the Steelers don't really utilize him a lot on offense other than just, blocking fullback here and there. But that's
Yeah,
25 offensive players for me
got you.
at this point. So, yeah, let's move on to the defense. You want to start with, how do you want to start? Do you want to split it up between – I'm actually going to let you just go. How do you want to start with the defense here?
Okay, I'll go with I mean, I have it written out as like defensive end, D tackle, then the Sam separately.
Yeah, okay, let's do that. Go ahead. You start us
Okay.
off with your D tackles.
Okay, D tackles, Fletcher Cox, Javon Hargrave, Jordan Davis, obviously rookie, Milton Davis, who's going to be solid, probably get more reps this year, and then Marlon, I can never pronounce his name.
Tuiupata or whatever his name
Yeah,
is.
yeah, I can never pronounce that, but yeah, those are the five. Or sorry, wait, sorry, yeah, those are the five D tackles. I mean, we have so much depth; it's like really hard to fit. Like we could realistically cut Marlon considering the depth, but I think they're going to keep him because he's had a really good training camp and preseason. So I think he makes a good case to make the roster.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think that this is definitely the Eagles up front have a ton of depth, and I think I'm curious to see what the numbers are at the rest of the positions we get into here. But I wouldn't be surprised if they keep all five of these guys.
Yeah.
So I'm going to kind of split up the defensive. You know what? I'll actually just do nose tackles specifically, and then I'll do the defensive end, and then I'll do my outside linebackers with your Sam linebackers.
Okay.
So for the nose tackles, I have them keeping one. That's Tyson Alualu. I'm gonna consider Cam Hayward as a defensive end just for this exercise. So I'm gonna have them keeping Tyson Alualu. I think Montravius Adams. They would keep him on the roster, but the Steelers don't typically keep more than 6 defensive linemen, and I have them keeping 5 defensive ends. I'll get to in a second. So I have Tyson Alualu being the only prototypical nose tackle, and I wouldn't be shocked if they put Montravius Adams on the short-term IR to start the season, kind of maneuver it that way, with the potential of him to then make the roster. I think that if Mason Rudolph is traded, then that's potentially where second nose tackle's roster spot would come into play. So that's how I see that would kind of balance out on the roster. But in this exercise, I have them putting Adams on the short-term IR. I have them keeping Rudolph on the roster. And my next nose tackle out would be Carlos Davis, who I think they're going to keep on the practice squad for now. So yeah, that's all for the nose tackles. And then if you want to go into the defensive ends, I'll do the rest of the defensive linemen for the Steelers with that.
Okay. So 4 defensive ends I have here written down. Brandon Graham, obvious. Josh Sweat, obvious. Derek Barnett, I mean, he's done enough to prove he belongs on the roster this season.
Oh, 100%.
And then Taron Jackson, who's also had a pretty good preseason. He's racked up a couple sacks, a couple of good games. The last 3 games. So, he's made his case to be the 4th defensive end.
Yeah. I don't see any question with that. Again, I'm curious how this is going to stack up continually with how the numbers work out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not surprised by that. Nine guys going up front. So yeah, we'll get into your outside linebackers. But yeah, all right, we'll continue through with this, and I'll move over to the defensive ends. I have them keeping 5. I have them keeping Cam Hayward, Larry Ogunjobi, Chris Wormley, Isaiah Loudermilk, and DeMarvin Leal. So I think it's pretty clear cut that that's who it's going to be. I don't think I'm surprising anyone with that. Yeah. Henry Mondu is going to be left off. Khalil Davis is going to be left off. That's just kind of how I see things going. If they can get, Mondu on the practice squad, I think they will. He's been on their team at various points in recent years. So I think, having him on the special in the practice squad as depth would be fine. But other than that, I think it's a clear cut 5 that are staying as defensive ends. No need to really elaborate on it.
Right. Okay. So moving on to Sam. I mean, this one, our linebackers, Hassan Reddick is obviously going to be on the roster. Hopefully rushing the passer more than he is dropping in coverage at Jonathan Gannon. Then Patrick Johnson and Kyron Johnson both have had pretty solid preseasons, even if they were more, used as special teamers. They're still pretty good on the special teams unit. So those are my 3 for.
Yeah, them keeping 3 Sams. Okay.
Yeah.
This makes sense. So yeah, that I guess it all kind of balances out. So I'm just trying to do the math real quick. So you have them keeping 9, 10. You have them keeping 12 guys up front, so to speak.
Yes.
And then
that is
Yeah,
35.
so I have them keeping one less. I have the Steelers keeping. Well, I'm going to get into my outside linebackers right now. I have 4 outside linebackers, and that's where a difference comes because I have an extra guy. I think I'm going to have an extra guy in the secondary for the Steelers. That you have the extra guy in your defensive line, so it works out. So I'm
Yeah,
curious
yeah.
who's getting cut later on in your secondary, but we'll obviously get to that in a second. The outside linebackers for the Steelers is an interesting spot here. Obviously, T.J. Watt, best defensive player in the NFL, in my opinion. Yeah, my humble opinion, my unbiased opinion, right? And then Alex Highsmith, he's had injury troubles throughout the start of training camp, or throughout training camp and the start of and preseason, everything like that. But I expect him to be a full go, and I'm really looking. I said it. I think he's under pressure. He's got to make a jump here at this point and be that true outside linebacker opposite T.J. Watt. Get to double-digit sacks. It's time to go. Outside of that, it's scary. If one of those two guys goes down long term, I mean, we're talking about Derek Tuska getting really meaningful snaps in the regular season at that point. They cut
Yeah.
Jannard Avery. I honestly can't fathom why they cut Jannard Avery so early. He would have
Yeah.
been a surprise cut right now, but at this point to cut him, everything that I heard at training camp, he looked good. He missed the first preseason game with injury, but, like I said, reportedly having a really good camp. He had previous starting experience with the Eagles, obviously, which in 2021 with the Eagles, started 12 of their 16 games that he played in, 43 total tackles and a sack. So I think the Steelers are going to sign another veteran, but for now, to cut the roster down to 53, what I think I see them doing is keeping Watt, Highsmith, Derek Tuska, and then one of either Delonte Scott or Hamilcar Rashed, who, either one of them, it's fine. Either one of them could make the roster. I could see them doing it if they kind of want to mix and match a little bit. I could see them initially just keeping 3 guys and then looking to add someone immediately after roster cutdowns happen.
Yeah.
But they got to add someone here. There's no way that this is what they can do with their depth. And again, I'm really surprised they cut Jannard Avery, but they have their reasoning, and now he's a Buccaneer. I don't even know if he's going to make the roster with the Buccaneers because they're pretty deep.
Yeah.
Outside linebacker. But yeah, I don't know. It was certainly an interesting decision to go about cutting him at this point. And yeah, they're thin behind Watt and Highsmith.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you got to hope neither of them goes down. But yeah, I agree with you. That was a surprise cut. I thought they would have kept him at least for tomorrow, like the 53-man roster cut down. But
yeah,
not the case.
I'm pretty shocked when that came in, especially because I mean the lack of experience you're now going to have behind T.J. Watt and Alex Highsmith too is also palpable.
Yeah, yeah. So moving on to like middle linebacker, I guess, other linebacker.
Yep.
TJ Edwards. That's very obvious. Kaiser White. I mean, he's been really good preseason. Nakobe Dean, Sean Bradley, more of a special teamer. And then Davion Taylor. I have him keeping 5 inside linebackers. So Davion Taylor, that one was interesting because he said his last 2 games have been pretty rough. I mean, yeah, he showed a lot of promise in training camp, but he's almost sort of made a case for him to not make the team because of how poorly he's played the last 2 games. But I think they're still going to keep him despite his really rough showings the last 2 games.
Yeah, I mean, I think you still got to keep him. I mean, he certainly hasn't looked good, but I think it's the fact too he was a former 3rd-round pick.
Yeah,
not that that's justifying. It was a couple years ago now. But I mean, I'm with you. I think you keep him, but keeping 5 linebackers on top of everything that you had on your defensive line. So I'm curious who are some of the odd guys out here in the secondary, but we'll get into that in a second. As for my inside linebackers, Miles Jack, Devin Bush, Robert Spillane are all obvious. Then I think you get into some interesting questions here.
Mm-hmm.
Then you get into the case of, I think Mark Robinson, who was a 7th-round pick this year, I think he's shown enough to make the roster. So I have him getting one of the final roster spots here. I don't think it's even a question at this point. He's shown flashes in coverage. He's shown flashes at making tackles. He's really raw. He was a running back that converted to inside linebacker, but he's also getting a little bit of work on special teams. So I think he's on the roster, no doubt. And then I think they're going to keep a 5th guy. Now, I think it's going to be Marcus Allen because Marcus Allen is huge on special teams, but he's been injured for all of training camp. So if he's healthy, I think he's on the 53. If it's not going to require anything long-term, then they keep him on the 53. But if he is injured to the point where he's going to be out for a few weeks, then I think they put him on short-term IR. The Steelers know how valuable he is to special teams, one of their best special teamers. So he's going to be on the roster when he's healthy. And if they can put him on the short-term IR, then I think that Buddy Johnson sticks around to start the season on the 53-man roster. But if Allen is healthy, they put him on the 53, then I think Buddy Johnson starts the year on the IR. And I think either way, the Steelers have 5 inside linebackers here to start the season.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Buddy Johnson is just too one-dimensional. All he can really do is he comes up with some big tackles. He can stuff the box. He's awful in coverage. He doesn't play on special teams, so he's a little bit limited in what you can really do with him. And we haven't seen him develop the way that you'd like to. So at that point, yeah, that's how I see it shaking up for the Steelers, keeping 5 guys on the inside linebacker spot.
Right. So on to the secondary now. So I guess we'll start with, do you want to separate with corners and safeties?
Yeah, let's separate corners and safeties. Go ahead with corners first.
Okay, right. So the obvious ones being the first 3, Darius Slay, James Bradbury, Avonte Maddox. Those 3 are obviously going to start. And then I have Zach McPherson. And then this one might be a little surprising, Josh Joby. I know he's injured, but from what I've been seeing, it's not a significant injury. If anything, they might put him on short-term IR, as we've been alluding to, and then they might bring up someone like Kerry Vincent Jr. or Blackwell, one of those 2 guys who've been inconsistent but have shown enough to perhaps make the roster. But I have, overall the Eagles keeping 5. Maybe that's a little too that's not enough. Maybe I could see a situation where they maybe trade Dillard. If they trade Dillard, they keep a 6th cornerback perhaps. But from what I have those 5 making it.
Yeah, I think the top 4 are very clear cut. I think it really stinks that Job got hurt, because I think he was without a doubt the most deserving of that 5th corner spot. And from some of those other guys, the down on the roster corners, you really didn't see many flashes from them or anything that you really want to keep them on the roster. So I think if Job is good to go, he's healthy. Maybe he misses week 1 or 2. I think they still keep him on the roster. But one way or another, I think they definitely want that last corner spot to go to Josh Job. So I'm with you on that one.
Yeah.
As for the Steelers corners, also an interesting situation. So I think the top 4 are very clear cut, kind of like the Eagles. Cam Sutton, Levi Wallace, Akella Witherspoon, Arthur Maulette, all making the roster, no doubt. They're going to be used, obviously the majority of the time. And then that 5th corner spot is interesting. It's basically at this point between Justin Lane and James Pierre. Neither one has done anything crazy to make you say, okay, this guy's got to stay on the roster. I think the one clear way that Justin Lane stays on the roster is if they cut Miles Boykin, because Justin Lane was their gunner last year on special teams. So I think he would be, kept there. He'd fill that role, and that would kind of be it. But again, I think it's a toss-up. It'll be one of those 2 guys. It doesn't really matter. I think if they cut Miles Boykin, it's Justin Lane. If they keep Miles Boykin, you know what? I honestly still think it's going to be Justin Lane either way, because I don't think the Steelers really want to admit that, they messed up on Justin Lane, who was a former 3rd-round pick. James Pierre was an undrafted free agent. So I think kind of admitting that mistake when it's pretty even, you might as well just keep the 3rd-round pick. Maybe Justin Lane can develop a little bit. I don't know who has any clue there. But yeah, it's a toss-up between those 2 guys. Doesn't really make a difference. Honestly, this is kind of a dark horse spot that I could see the Steelers potentially adding another corner if the right guys are cut during the rounds of cuts here, to potentially add another guy to this position group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a very interesting position group, like you said. In terms of that last sort of position or role in at cornerback. So moving on to safety. Okay, this is actually the one I had the toughest time with. So up until this point, I have 45 players on the roster. So I have 5 more safeties here. The obvious ones being Marcus Epps, Anthony Harris. Then after that, it gets a little iffy. Jaquiski Tartt he hasn't been good at all. So I have him getting cut, actually not making the roster. Then
I think it's fair. I honestly think that seems to be the likely outcome for him at this point.
Yeah, I mean, he played into the 4th quarter of the last 2 games.
Would you be surprised if he was kept on the roster at this point, or is there any shot that they're like, hey, he's got experience, we'll take a flyer on him?
It's just he hasn't shown enough signs to he really hasn't made a case for himself to be on the roster. I mean, like I said, he was the last 2 games been playing all the way through to the 4th quarter, to the end of the game, which is never a good sign for a veteran like him, especially. So I really don't think like why keep him when you could have a younger player with more upside, perhaps, who could also contribute on special teams. That's sort of how I see it. I don't think they're going to keep him. I don't really think he adds much to either unit, really.
Fair enough.
Um, so I know I was kind of down on Kayvon Wallace, but I also have him. But I do have him on the roster. He's kind of redeemed himself since I said he's had a bad training camp since been seeing all those reports. So I think, sure, he might not be that. I mean, he could. That's my issue with that is that I don't like that he would be the third safety. Like that sort of backup. I don't really like. Maybe the Eagles try and sign someone if some good player or solid player gets cut from another team or something like that. Bring in a veteran. I hope they do that. But I think Kayvon Wallace is by default that third safety, which I like. Yeah, like I said, is not encouraging. But then the other two, I have Reed Blankenship and Andre. I can't pronounce his name either.
Shasher, however, yeah.
Yeah. So I have them too. Reed Blankenship. I was surprised when I saw on Bleeding Green Nation that Blankenship wasn't on the roster. Like they didn't have him in there. That has me the most surprised. I mean, Josiah Scott really he's showed a lot of promise, but it's a really tough one. The Bleeding Green Nation had Josiah Scott over Blankenship in theirs, but I think it should be the reverse just because I don't know. Blankenship's been making tackles like left and right. He's been very consistent, at least tackling wise, but
I'm with you. I think Blankenship's more deserving of the spot at this point.
But it's really close. It's really tough. I mean, either way, one of those two guys is going to make practice squad, or one of those three guys will be practice squad if they're not on the active roster.
So, how many guys did you have on offense and how many on defense?
23 on offense, 27 on defense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That adds up there. There you go. I mean, I think it's because you're only keeping the two quarterbacks. You're only keeping 5 wide receivers that you get those 2 extra spots to keep a fifth safety for sure, and to keep some of those extra interior defensive or some of those defensive linemen up front on the defensive line. So, all right, that rounds out the Eagles defense, and I will close out the Steelers defense at this point with the safety position. And for the safeties, I also don't think there's a lot of surprises. Well, I guess maybe you could make the case. I think the KZ injury kind of throws a wrinkle in things. So the 3 clear-cut ones are Minkah Fitzpatrick, Terrell Edmonds. They're also going to keep Trey Norwood. He's got a lot of versatility to his game. Mm-hmm. They're going to keep all 3 of those guys. KZ would have been the 4th one, and I would have implied to say they'll probably only keep 4 if it was KZ. Now that he's injured, I think they look to maybe keep 2 more. Miles Killebrew is the really interesting one because he's been hurt for pretty much all of the summer with some not undisclosed injury, but he hasn't been able to get healthy from his own injury issues. And, the reason that I think I still see the Steelers being willing to keep him around, I sound like a broken record now, is how much of a contributor he is on special teams. So if he's healthy, I think that the Steelers keep him. And I think the Steelers keep him. If he's not healthy, I think maybe they look for a short-term IR spot for him. But I think he's on the 53-man roster to start if his injury is not that significant that he'll be ready for the start of the season. And then the last safety spot, I have 5 of them here, is Elijah Riley, who they just brought in from the Jets when they I believe they cut Donovan Stenner to make room for him. And he actually had a pretty good preseason game in this final preseason game that the Steelers had against the Lions. I had his numbers right here. Let me just find him. Elijah Riley had 4 total tackles, 2 of them solo, and he had a pass defense. So solid last preseason game, and because of the KZ injury, he may just sneak onto the roster here. So I have them keeping 5 safeties there.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, that sounds like a pretty solid group overall. I mean, a better situation than what the Eagles have overall.
Yeah, it's just the KZ injury hurts, but what are you going to do? Injuries are a part of football, and they're going to put him on the IR. Hopefully he'll be back before the regular season ends. It sounds like he is going to miss most of the first half, at least with that wrist injury. But, so that's how the Steelers defense stacks up. Do you want to move on to special teams?
Yeah. Should we just do like kicker, punter, long snapper, punt return, kick return, just those 5?
Yeah, we could. Yeah, go ahead. You could do it all in one go.
Okay. So kicker Jake Elliott's not going anywhere. Punter Aaron C. Plus. I mean, he's looked better than last year, so I mean, the Eagles are going to give him another shot. But they shouldn't rule out maybe bringing another one if he performs poorly. Long snapper Rick Lovato. I mean, he's been there forever, but that one's not a
No real
surprise to me.
surprises.
Yeah, none of those are surprises to me. And then kick return, I'm realizing, Jason Huntley, not on the roster, and then Devin Allen not being there or Covey. I'm like, well, now who's the punt return? I mean, by default, I guess it'd be Jalen Rager. I mean, I guess
Yeah, I think it'd have to be. Yeah.
yeah, but again, like even with some of those other guys I just mentioned, it's not very encouraging. It's not the most. It's not the best. What am I trying to say? Like core of or like returners. Really, it's it is what it is. But I think that's just kind of how it shake out. How it's going to shake out.
Yeah, for sure. So I had 25 guys on offense, 25 on defense. I know we just talked about how you had, I think, 27 on offense and 23 on defense was how you shook out.
Yeah.
So then, for the special teams, for me, it's pretty clear cut. Chris Boswell is your kicker. Presley Harvin has looked great all summer as your punter. And then Christian Kuntz, who's been with the Steelers for a couple years now, as your long snapper. I talked before about Gunnar Olszewski. He's clearly the kick punt returner for this team. So really no questions there. And I think with that, your special teams is pretty clear cut. So that's how these rosters, that's how we see them shake out. We'll get the final word tomorrow on what actually takes place here.
Oh boy, yeah, tomorrow's gonna be a very eventful day.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. I'm excited to find out like who's the guys that we're going into the season with at this point. That's an exciting time, of course, during any kind of getting ready for any NFL season, and we'll get that tomorrow.
Yeah, always those few surprises on those rosters, the final rosters.
So, you got any final thoughts here before we wrap things up?
I mean, we got next episode, which I believe will be the record predictions, and it's football time. It's time. It's time to go.
Yeah, next weekend we're doing record predictions, standing predictions, and projections, and everything like that. So be sure to tune in for it. And then, like you said, it's go time, baby. The NFL is here, man. It's back.
Oh, yeah.
It's back.
Yes, sir.
Just seeing the Steelers and Lions the other day play their starters in 2 quarters, you could still feel the preseason aspect in the back of your mind, but it felt pretty damn close to NFL regular season football. So we are back. We'll be bringing you another episode tomorrow, so be sure to tune in for that. That being said, until next time, check us out on Twitter and Instagram. We're always pumping out content on there. Thank you for joining us whenever you do listen to this, and we will be talking to you next week. Bye-bye, everybody. Take care.